Hello there. Taking a look at Van Morrison, uh, the pop artist, born August 31st, 1945 in Belfast, Ireland. He started out with a group in the 60s called Them and wrote some classic songs with them, most notably the song Gloria. But he went on to a long and still um, continuing solo career ever since 1967. Um, Here we see he has Gemini rising and Mars in conjunct with Gemini. Gemini is the sign of the twins. It's the first of the air signs in the zodiac. The first sign being Aries, fire, Taurus, earth, and the third sign, uh, Gemini, which is the sign whereas Aries is I am, Taurus is I have, Gemini is I think, and it's the first sign of the mind, of communication. And he has also Uranus here, which is more of a generational influence, but it does not. It travels very slowly, so it doesn't reach the same sign, but once every 84 years. So this is the generation he was born in the 40s. Had this in common. Another person who had this was Bob Dylan. Do believe that Uranus had crossed over. I have to double check that, but it was either at the very end of Taurus or the beginning of Gemini in conjunction, with Bob Dylan's son. And we see here that he's a Virgo by the sun. Here in his fourth house, not far away from his fifth. But any time you have, here are the four angles: the first, the fourth, the seventh, and the 10th. The 10th is definitely the angle, the beginning of the 10th house, the MC as it's called, the midheaven, is the highest point and is usually considered your public, the way you're perceived in the public. It's your most public, most out aspect. And as you can see, for somebody who is in the entertainment industry, most of his planetary positioning is actually very close together. It's a bowl shape, all pointing towards this. Is below that horizon, which means that he's not really a very public person, and that's in evidence from the fact that most people, even though they may have heard and be a fan of Van Morrison's music, he's not known to be a very a celebrity type person that you wouldn't see him on talk shows, for instance, or doing a lot of magazine interviews. He's a very private person, and that also comes through in his music. I think that he is not very much concerned with outward appearances. Now, again, he has the moon in the first house, and this gives him a person who wears his heart on his sleeve, the emotions. And the moon is in Cancer. Although his rising sign is Gemini, the moon is in conjunction, and it's in Cancer, which is the sign that the moon rules. On top of that, he has his nodal axis here in Cancer and Capricorn, whose north node is in Cancer, so his south node always, as it follows, is in Capricorn. So then you have Saturn in Cancer. So here we have a strong emphasis. Sun in the 4th house, which is the house that corresponds to the sign Cancer, because it is the 1, 2, 3, 4th sign and the first water sign. And all the water signs and houses are the private, emotional, personal houses. They're more about the feelings and inner world. And the 3 signs, 3 water signs, Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces, are all water, and the 4th, 8th, and 12th houses, 12th signs, I should say. Now, he also has a couple planets in the 12th house, the Sun, Mars, Uranus. He has nothing in the 8th, but again, most importantly, he has nothing in the 10th, the 9th, 10th, nothing up here at all, which again is the public sphere. So he doesn't have an actual need or desire to be famous, which, depending on how you look at it, may be why he isn't more famous than he is. I mean, he is famous, don't get me wrong, but there are people, I would imagine, especially younger music fans, who, though they might know who the Rolling Stones are, or the Beatles, or Jimi Hendrix, and other 60s, Bob Dylan, other 60s icons, they may not know the name Van Morrison, for the sheer fact that Van Morrison, and I'd say this even more so than Bob Dylan, who's another person who's kind of shy of publicity, or kind of downplays the notion that he needs to do anything more than his art, and that he should have to promote it or put his own personal life or sacrifice it so that he can be more successful in his career. So I think all that his need to communicate is obviously here, with an angular Mars and Gemini, and that being his ascendant. That being said, his need to be famous is not. But he is an artist, strong water presence. Leo, he has Venus, Pluto, and Mercury. It is very creative. It's fire. Pluto and Mercury are both in opposition to his midheaven. So there is a connection with his public persona, but it comes from a very private place. So I guess you could kind of say that he's known for being very private, and Mercury is his ruler because it rules Gemini, and it's down here too. I mean, how many people can even say they've heard Van Morrison speak outside of a record? Heard his voice when he wasn't singing. I mean, you don't hear him talking. Again, no interviews, very few interviews anyway, and I can't even think of any time I've seen him on a piece on television talking about music or with anybody. Very private man, and it shows here. His part of fortune is even in the 4th house, which is the opposite house from the 10th. The 4th is your roots, where you come from, and where you go for asylum, or for shelter, your home from the outside world. So there's lots of emphasis here in this area. The 4th house, especially with his Mercury and Sun, 2 personal planets being there. In the fifth, he has Jupiter, which is the planet of abundance. And the fifth is the house of creative. Um, it's the house of children. It corresponds with Leo, the fifth sign. And in the fifth house, we encounter the creative area. And as we can see here, Neptune, which is the ruler of Pisces and the ruler of all things mystical and spiritual and transcendent. That would definitely describe his creative output, along with Jupiter, the abundance of it, and the joyous quality. I like to think that, I mean, there's a transcendence, but there's a joy to his music, and joyful transcendence. These two together, these are both spiritual planets. Jupiter more in the traditional religious sense of, and also, you know, Jupiter also rules the law, the church, higher education, and some of the aspirations of Jupiter are a little bit more earthbound. There are still aspirations to go beyond the limits, though, and to expand, whereas Neptune is about dissolving all boundaries altogether. There are no boundaries to expand, because with Neptune there are no boundaries at all, and that's why it goes beyond this realm. So those two together are, I think, a good description of the quality and sound of his best music, and he has a lot of it. Can couple that with the Venus in Leo, which is the creative fifth house correspondent, and Venus being associated more superficially. Neptune is definitely associated with art, because that can be transcendent. It's also associated with film and things like that because of the illusion aspect of it. But Venus is the first planet that kind of deals, or kind of is associated with beauty and harmony, and therefore some of the more pleasant or superficially pleasant aspects of art. Not to say unimportant, but not as necessarily transcendent. You know, Venus is pleasure, pure and simple, but more of an earthly pleasure, personal earthly pleasure, and he takes a lot of personal pleasure in a very creative way. And we see also that his Cancer moon, very, very protective, sentimental, emotional, feeling position here, close to the angle. It's feeling anyway, but here it is in the angle, so it's again, it's heart on the sleeve thing. It's very, it's the first thing that people notice about him when they meet him, because that's what the ascendant is. It's your first impression. The sun may be the most important aspect of your purpose and growth in life, but the ascendant is where we come in, and where how we look and how we appear to the world one-on-one, whereas the midheaven is how we appear to the world publicly. This is like more of a one-on-one type deal, and the moon being there one-on-one, the first thing you notice about him is that he's very sensitive, emotional, reticent, probably shy, tender, innocent, and to go on with what I was about to say, it forms a square here, 1 degree Cancer, Yes, 1 degree Cancer to 1 degree Libra, 5 degrees for Neptune, and this accentuates the sensitivity. Jupiter grows everything. It's the biggest planet in the solar system, so we know that it's associated with expansion of anything. So expansion of the Neptune principle in square, a 10th square with his emotion. So this is already amplified by being angular, and it's further amplified by Jupiter squaring and Neptune squaring. This gives him highly refined artistic sensitivity and sensibility that falls in line with also Venus, his art sextiling these two. So he has a square with a direct line to his emotions, and Venus sextiling Jupiter and Neptune as well in Leo. Very, very creative, very transcendent spiritual art. So yes, I wanted to touch on his music, Van Morrison, and if you'd like, you can contribute to my Patreon page. I have the link down here below. I want to thank you for looking at the stars with me again.